Okay, this is the third vlog for um, Chained. This update is pretty much completely building scenes, building assets, and yeah, just pretty much getting on with it. There's not much more development and not much more sort of design and story to go. On the foundation anyway, obviously I'm looking into lots of different additions and subtractions and alterations, but the foundation, the groundwork's all done. So this vlog will just pretty much be showing you how I'm animating, showing you what sort of techniques I'm using, and yeah. Scene one that you're seeing here. Obviously I have the walk cycle already done, so the legs are just a placeholder in this to get the perspectives and stuff all right. But the way I've done it is this is the build. So this is the what I want the look to be. Played around with all the different textures on the floor and the perspectives of the barrels and the cannons on the left hand side, got the seals and then some fog layers. So basically what I did was I went through and built all the individual assets in the same way that I developed my characters and the ships and stuff like that. And then added them into the scene, just copied and pasted and put them all together into this build. And then once I had those sorts of layers, you can see as well, you got like fog layers. These are just sort of textures that I made up, which I've used throughout the animations. And then this is the rain. It's just the sort of look that I wanted from the rain. So I didn't bring these in and animate the rain exactly. So yeah, once I had all the assets exported, then I was able to take them on the After Effects and start building up the scenes. So I'll show you here the different sort of process that it took to build up my scenes and all the different effects I've been using. Off the bat, I have my walk cycle in its own composition. So yeah, the walk cycle is just its own composition, which I was able to add into just the full scene. And then around that, I put in the floor and the cannons and all the other small bits. Fog layers then, I have just simple sort of motion from right to left. If I get, yeah. So the fog layer just has a simple sort of motion from right to left. But then I've layered it through the scene. So I've put some behind the first layer of cannons, and then I've put some further in the distance, and then just layered it up in that sense. And then on the fog layers, which are just the 2D textures, I've added the fog lights. The fog lights effect onto the 2D images, just to give it that sort of floating light, as if the light was shining through it, which works quite nicely. So then I've added in rain layers as well, in the same sort of idea as the fog. So just front layer of rain is a slightly less amount of raindrops, but with some Gaussian blur and some motion blur, which just adds this top layer of like quite thick but sparse raindrops. And then after that, I've got just the full scene rain, which is the ones you're seeing. It's just slightly smaller, slightly sharper in the distance. And then in other scenes, I've built it up so that there's even more in the distance just to fill up the scene and stuff like that. So then this is my second scene, and I won't go through all the scenes that I've done so far, but this is the second scene then. So again, I built up these assets, built up the wheel, built up, added the same cannons, and even though the perspectives might not be quite right, just put them on the deck because the shapes and the colors sort of fill up the deck space and fill up the scene. Then I got my seals, which I've just taken from the main ship build and just scaled them up and added some texture to them. Built these ropes, built something, but I mean, with what you'll see in the After Effects file is that the stuff beyond the captain is pretty much just filler, because it's like depth of field blurred out anyway, just to have that sort of that look. So making it too detailed, making it too full wasn't necessary, just because of the aesthetic that I was going for. So as you can see, whenever you move into the After Effects file, you've got this all blurred out. You just needed the rough shapes and the rough colors to be there to add to that effect. And the ropes are blurred, the sails are blurred, this is blurred. So he's the only thing that's really fully in focus. Been discussing with my lecturer just whilst we're on the scene that this hand isn't quite right with the perspective, something's quite wrong, just something not quite right with it. So this is being looked at currently. Well, it's been added to the list of things to look at, the nice to haves further down the line. It's quite a short scene, so you have to be looking quite hard to notice it, but it did stand out initially. So and yeah, again, you can see that the multiple layers of fog, some of them in front of the captain, some of them then beyond, and then filling up the deck space. And then again with the rains, you've got these larger raindrops come down and right in front of the camera, and you got some just beyond the captain, and then you got filler raindrops on the deck, just to really sell the effect, you know, make it look busy, make it look like it's in the middle of a storm. So yeah, and then with the basic sort of animation, I'll just play this through the preview. Whenever I play this, this is the full composition. So you can see there's some sort of camera sway in it. You can see there's a vignette layer on the top of it, just because it makes it look a bit more grungy and a bit more dark feeling, which is what I was going for, so that's what I wanted. So you add in this vignette, you can see the fog moving through the scene, you can see the heavier raindrops blurred out in front, and you can see the other layers beyond that. You can see the different layers of fog, you can see that the sails have slight, because obviously I was going for that parallax animation, but whenever these scenes are like this, there's not too much movement, it's just creating slight differentiation. So the sails will be tilting slightly differently to the front of the captain will be slightly, you know, it's just, if they have slightly different motion paths and their different depth of field blurs on them, it has a lot of movement, a lot of depth throughout the scene. So yeah, I think that effect works quite well, and it sells the depth of the animation. So there's some slight turbulent displacement on the sails, which I've used throughout the rest of the animations as well. So as if the light's just shining through. It's very hard to see unless you're looking for it, but you will see bits of it go darker and then go lighter again, and it helps with the fog being also with those fog lights in it. It's always that movement and that sort of it being alive. So you can see one effect that I've used quite a lot, because obviously it's used on flags, it's used on sails, and it's used on items of clothing, is wave warp. So I've used that on his ponytail, just as if the wind's going through it slightly, and then changed up the evolutions so it doesn't continue the same animation in exactly the same pattern every time. And then yeah, slight rotation to the wheel, even though it's just a 2D asset, that slight rotation without having to move the perspective too much gives that full feeling of motion. So what I'll do now is I'll show you the full current scenes 1 to 6. A lot of placeholders, a lot of things that are being changed, but I'll talk about that after, just to show you where it's at. So yeah, that's where it's currently at, scenes 1 to 6. And you can see how all the sort of the layering and tilt as if the ship's moving really sells that effect of the depth and the motion of the ship, and then obviously the music's in time with the feet. Then you've got this. Then you got moving on to the ship animations. I've utilized all the same sort of effects with the fog and the rain, but added in a few more. So the water texture, the way the water's moving, that's just, again, 2D textures that have been added motion and added scale in After Effects. And then the splashes on the ship, they are just 2D textures that are painted in Photoshop and then layered, added into composition, and then sort of almost like it's like a spray texture, like a spray paint, lots of little pixels, and then put them in the After Effects and just compose them as a scale them up and fade them out, and then just layer that on top of each other, so that gives that sort of splash as if it's hitting the front of the ship and then dissipating off the side of it, which I think works quite well, because that's what I had originally sort of designed the stills as. That was the vision of this sort of splash effect, so managed to get that done relatively easily. And then you can see that the wave warp has been used on the flag, and there is turbulent displacement on the sails with slight bits of motion, just to keep it a more subtle movement rather than lots of big movements, just to make it feel alive a bit more. There's also then I like to use this depth of field blur, so initially whenever this ship comes into shot, it's blurred out quite a lot, and then as it moves further away, it comes into focus. Just because I like playing around with that focus shift and the focus pulls. It's just something I find quite fun in photography and in videography, and I thought it looked quite nice in the animation as well, so I thought I'd play around with that, and it works quite nice to just make it a bit more interesting, You can also see that whenever the ship comes into shot, there's a lot more rain. So I've just turned, the rain is more in focus whenever the ship first comes in, so it's almost like it's getting a lot of the foreground, and then as the ship goes further away, the larger raindrops become more out of focus and dissipate more. So it's just adding that, depth and all that sort of stuff. So that worked quite nicely, I thought. And then moving on to the sail. Now, this sail has been obviously redesigned from what it was, but the motion of it, it's just using wave warp at the minute. But I'm looking into just having a bit more dynamic, because it's such a key shot, and having that repeating animation, and just wanted to make it a bit more dynamic and adding some maybe folds into the texture. And then moving on to the captain here. So same scene build techniques, using the wheel in front and then him, and then filling up the background with just some really rough assets, and then adding a very slight rotation to the wheel, just to add motion to the front layer, a very slight tilt in his head. I'll obviously have the flag in the background out of focus. Again, adding layers, adding depth, adding life to the animation. Got your fog, got your rain, so continuing that on through. And the first shot is him obviously close up, and that's right, further out, close up. Now, whenever I was first designing the captain, I had two different eyes. So one was slightly wider open, which I was actually planning on using for this shot, so his eye was going to be wider open, and then as it zoomed in, have him squint. And I just completely forgot that I had the other texture. I completely forgot that I did two eyes. So whenever I built this up and then showed it to a lecturer in my tutorial, he recommended have the eye move, and I just completely forgot that I had the other eye. So that's something I'm looking to add in as soon as possible. But just thought I'd use this full scene build and show it to you first, because it's quite a lot of progress from where you last seen it. Going back to the start then, a few more sort of additions and alterations. Been talking about having, this is obviously just a placeholder, this first start screen, but hoping to move it, make it a bit more dynamic, change the font, just design it out a bit more, but also talking about, because this intro is quite long and I was using it as placeholder just in case I wanted to add in more scenes or something, but talked about, it was recommended to me that maybe putting chained into this first scene, maybe during or after, just to add it in, because it by itself is not really necessary, but adding it into the scene could make this a bit more, just a bit more really. So yeah, thinking about putting that in, but also in the background of this, just to sell that effect of depth, because there's not a lot of movement in this further in the further down the scene really. So looking at different things to add in, so maybe like there was talked about having a like a torch, like a fire torch, and then as the ship moves, the flame moves with it, or what I actually wanted initially was to have guards, like royal guards standing, and maybe their sword in their hand could move with the motion of the ship, just to add that bit more life into the background, just because the legs are obviously the focus, but having that movement adds and adds, and that's basically what I'm looking at through these first six scenes. It's just things that I could put in to add to the whole scene, add to the whole effect, and really the more, not the more the better, but you know, it's nearly there, and there's just a few things that I can add, maybe adding a bit, because the cannons look quite nice because they've got the layers of fog going in between them, but the barrels then look a bit flat because of that contrast. So the lack of contrast between them. So you know, adding more depth to those assets will sell that effective depth in the whole scene as well. It's just having things there that I can basically fake it with. At the minute, there's not enough assets on the deck to sell that effective depth. So that's something for the first scene. For this scene, then there was already talked about changing his hand, changing the perspective, but also maybe having his left hand look at a compass or do something with his left hand. Maybe put something else on the deck just to have like a torches and lights and candles and stuff. Something that I quite like is there, something that are they're dynamic, but also add a bit of lighting and a bit more interest in the background and in the foreground and stuff. So torches are something that I'm looking into throughout the whole animation, but there's something that I can add in with a bit of lighting effect and a bit of plugins and stuff like that. So just on the back burner as a thought, but the hand's probably going to be looked at as a definite. And then in this scene, so it was also talked about maybe having an interim shot between this one and this one. It was mentioned that there's a slight disconnect between the two. It's if I can avoid adding it in, I will, just because the whole timing will be thrown off, and this shot will have to be shortened quite a bit. And the way I'm thinking about it in my head is, yes, there's a disconnect just because it jumps straight back, but I'm also having a thought about transitions between each shot, just instead of a straight cut. If it was went from this one and there was maybe a zoom transition, like a backward zoom transition, it might connect the two shots a bit nicer. Because at the minute it's just bang, bang, and you're 200, 300 meters backwards. So if there's like a zoom transition that I could go from this one and it takes that image and zooms it way back, and then you fall, you almost, yeah. So maybe a shot, maybe can be done in transitions, and that goes throughout all the scenes. So moving from this scene, zoom backwards, then you get that I'm now behind the ship. From this feat, zoom backwards, I'm now behind the captain. Using the transitions might work quite well just to connect everything, but something I can look into. So yeah, other than that, the main effects that I'm using are things that are built into After Effects, because that's what I want to get quite good with. So you got your turbulent displacements, you got your wave warps, you got just CC effects. So you got your CC rainfall and fog lights, just relatively straightforward stuff, but combining it all together to add motion and add life to these, what would essentially be still images, so animation. But yeah, next steps are just working through the rest of the scenes. I've been recording all my progress onto my timetable. So I kind of scrapped this whole asset creation because I stopped going by assets and just started going by scenes. So I'll be working my way through the scenes. Got my next one is going to be the cannons, so they're loading the cannons. Got some assets developed for that. Shots 8 and 9, so the cannons, the ships coming up beside each other, and then the pirate ship firing. So that's just going to be a repetition, really, of the second scene. The ships will all the same effects and stuff, but then I'll have to develop an effect or a animation for the cannon fires, which if I have 3 or 4 separate animations for a cannon firing, I can just layer them on because it's a very quick shot. So that works. Shot 10 is the big explosion, so lots of assets and lots of effects to develop for that one, but I am actually a week ahead of schedule. And then shot 11 will be another sort of bit of development because there's a lot of assets to make for it, but I've set aside quite a lot of time at the end to add in effects and add in lightning maybe, because I did want to use lightning as a as an effect throughout, but I haven't quite worked on that yet. And then at the bottom here you can see the things that I would like to add. So extra shot maybe, a couple of extra shots maybe, some extra lighting effects which could be used on lightning or on candles and torches. Then I've got extra assets, some extra motion assets to add in the background of scene 1, the hand and the captain scene 2, just the vignette. So I've been playing around with some extra vignette effects, but I think I've got that nailed down in my head anyway. And then playing around with the intro and playing around with adding the intro into the first scene and the title screen and stuff into the first scene. So that's a couple of things that are already down as extras, but as I say, I'm a week ahead of schedule, so hopefully I should be able to get a look at them. So that is my current progress on all the animation on Chained, and I think it's coming together quite nicely. I'm happy with how the effects are looking, I'm happy with how the whole aesthetic of the animation is coming together, so happy things.